Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. On the stage, we have the minds behind some of your favorite true crime documentaries and soon-to-be favorite true crime documentaries. So I apologize for reading off my phone, but my vision is very terrible, so this is easier for me to see. So we've got Mr. Ben McKenzie. He's an actor and director you may have seen in some television shows and movies. And he's also the maker of Everyone is Lying to You for Money about crypto. Then we have Julia Willoughby Nason, who's the director and EP of American Murder, Gabby Petito. Joe Berlinger, who has made probably every single documentary that you love, but most recently the Tylenol murders and Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey. We have Lisa Cortez, who is the director and EP of Murder Has Two Faces. And we have Shannon Evangelista, who is a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the co-founder of Hot Snakes Media, and the EP of The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. So, just to kick it off, why don't we start over there? I'd just love to hear a little bit about why everybody chose to make documentaries about true crime.
I didn't choose to make documentaries about true crime. I think it chose me. I started off making documentaries about people's inner lives and families, and a lot of those stories leaned into crime. So that's really it.
For me, it was really my background. It made the most sense. And as a former prosecutor, it was always about finding the truth, searching for the truth. And, it just made, for me, the chance to go out and, tell our stories in our unique way with our different perspective of investigating. It's not like we hire experts, like we are the experts. And I have this amazing team I'm super grateful for of law enforcement experts. And, getting to use that expertise to do television is a great gift. I'm very honored.
I sort of stumbled into documentary filmmaking because I was writing a book with a journalist about how cryptocurrency was a scam, and I decided to turn the cameras on. But I've always loved true crime, and the particular subgenre of true crime that I love is called stupid crime, or it's what I call stupid crime. The criminals, obviously committing crimes in public, sometimes via tweet, getting caught, turning on each other, kind of Coen Brothers-esque crime. So I tried to recreate that for Everyone's Lying to You for Money.
I have an uneasy relationship, actually, with the phrase true crime. I don't like that associated with my work, even though I understand why. And it has to do with first of all, true crime has a lot of baggage associated with it, and there's a lot of irresponsible true crime, and a lot of true crime that doesn't really, either has an irreverent tone to it, which is disrespectful to victims, or just isn't really looking for a larger social justice reason to tell the story. So I have a little bit of dis-ease with being called a true crime filmmaker, but I guess that's what I am. And my origin story kind of explains it. When we were making Paradise Lost in 1993, it came out in 96, about the West Memphis Three teenagers wrongfully convicted of a triple homicide. We actually went down thinking we were making a film about guilty teenagers and wondering how three teens could be so disaffected with life that they would, murder 3 8-year-olds in a satanic ritual. And my filmmaking partner, Bruce Sinofsky, who sadly passed away a decade ago, we sat through this trial and watched a modern-day witch hunt where no forensic evidence was introduced at trial. It was all, they listened to Metallica music, they read Stephen King books, okay, now go to death row. And when we, the last scene of the film are the West Memphis Three kind of being chained up and being sent off to prison, and we realized, wow, we're sitting on something that could actually help, and that gave birthed in me a desire to use film as a social justice medium, specifically in the criminal justice system. So I spent a big chunk of my career specifically on the issue of wrongful conviction. I know this sounds obnoxious to brag, but, my work, along with the work of many others, but my work has gotten, 6 people out of prison. So, thank you. So, I consider myself a crime and justice filmmaker, and then for some reason, the guy who recorded interviews with Ted Bundy in 2019 he wrote a book. He interviewed Bundy just before he was executed in 1989, a guy named Stephen Michaud, who wrote a book called Ted Bundy, Conversations with a Killer. And in 2017, he was a fan of Paradise Lost. He reached out to me and he said, hey, I've got these tapes that I found in my closet from 30 years ago. Do you think there'll be an interesting documentary there? And I said, well, the Bundy story's kind of a well-worn tire, but let me see. And I listened to the tapes, and I thought they had a very important perspective. I asked my 2 college-age daughters, do you know who Ted Bundy is? And neither one of them knew. And my younger daughter was about to go to MIT. My older daughter about to go to graduating from Columbia. So smart women who had no idea who Ted Bundy was. And so the lesson of Ted Bundy is just because somebody is good-looking and charming, it doesn't mean you should just implicitly trust them. So I thought that was a good idea to put out into the world. We pitched it to Netflix, and it did surprisingly well. And now I've been on a 6-year serial killer jag. So that's my story.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's wonderful to be in conversation with everyone here. The last couple of years, I've been directing films like Little Richard, I Am Everything, or The Space Race about astronauts. As a director and a producer, I've always been very interested in hidden histories and these untold stories, but really approaching them to peel the onion and get to the interiority of the characters. So I was resistant to enter into this space, and I really want to thank my incredible team at Cortez Filmworks for saying, okay, Lisa, what is important to you as a storyteller? You don't want to do what everyone else is doing, but you are interested in social justice. You are interested in igniting conversations and using a genre that, as Joe said, has oftentimes been misused, but to really use it to explore what are characters and worlds that we haven't seen with an empathetic lens. And so that's what led me to Murder Has Two Faces, that we developed and produced, and with a great team at ABC News Studios, and it's currently on Hulu. With this series, we look at 3 different stories. There's a well-known story of Laci Peterson, but did you know about Evelyn Hernandez? She's an immigrant. She was murdered 9 months before Laci. So much of her story shares a DNA with Laci's, but we never heard of her. And so I saw that this series, backed into something I've always been looking at, that Gwen Ifill talked about, which is the missing white woman syndrome, which is a disparity in media coverage given to white women and not given to other BIPOC women. And so there could be something entertaining that we made, something that was educational, and also with this series to ignite a conversation about why some stories are reflected and why we don't know about others.
And that's a great jumping off point, because I would love to talk a little bit about how everybody chooses the stories they're going to tell. Because I know journalists will have an inbox full of people reaching out and wanting help and wanting their stories told, and it becomes hard to figure out, what's the story that works, what's the story that audiences are going to react to. So I'd love for anyone to chime in, even if you want to roll off of that a little bit. I'd be interested to hear more.
I really appreciate the team, because they're like, Lisa, you're going to work on this for a long time. It's going to suck up your life. This needs to be reflective of your DNA and the things that you care about. And we just saw that with these parallel cases. It was so striking how there's a fascination with Gabby Petito. There's a fascination with Chandra Levy, even the Craigslist killer. And then when we started going deeper and talking to friends and family and law enforcement and pundits, there was so much about these shadowed stories that we saw the value in making certain that they were highlighted in the series, and that I think cinematically there were things that I was able to bring, particularly using location as a character. So when we're in San Francisco, it's very Hitchcockian. The music we use, the fog rolling in. When we go to D.C., it's House of Cards, and then the Boston Strangler, and a little bit of Spike Lee when we go to our third episode. So all of these things became really exciting as a filmmaker because it was like, okay, this series can have a distinct tone. It can be reflective of the conversations that we had with Senator Leah Webb here in New York, who established a task force for missing and murdered BIPOC women. She's featured in our third episode. We're doing a lot of work with her and some other senators and assemblywomen here in New York for screenings in communities. And so it became a 360 experience, which is something that I like to do with films that I'm involved in.
If I could jump in there too, I love the work you do. It's an honor to be on this panel with you. When I started out my career, I was in law school and I was in my final year, and they said part of the clinic was you're being appointed as a public defender, acting public defender, to a 19-year-old man who was facing life in prison for a robbery, and that just began a whole career of me being responsible, whether it was as a prosecutor for my victims, making sure not only that their voices were heard, but that, I'm giving them a microphone. And, the message was always, you don't have room for mistakes. I come from this with a unique background of having been an investigator in law enforcement before I did film. And there's no editing, there's no retakes, and there's no second chances. And that investigation that you're conducting for us, with our shows with Natalia, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, that was a 3-year investigation. Now we have a show coming out that hasn't been announced yet, but it was a 10-year investigation. And, so in terms of how we pick our stories, it's really that, when you have this background, and I'm lucky I work with, Ken Maxwell. He's the former head of the Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York City during 9/11, the head of JetBlue Security. My husband is former news producer. And we collaborate with law enforcement all the time, and we take a deep dive. And it becomes, when I was a defense attorney, I was responsible. My client was a criminal defendant charged with crime. When I was a prosecutor, my client was the victims and the people of the state of California and New York. But I believe when you're a documentarian that your client is the truth. And it takes a long time and a lot of patience and a lot of corroboration. And, having that background that we do of knowing evidence, knowing how to put on a federal trial, Ken knowing how to, be a bureau chief at the, FBI. There's a lot of responsibility there. And so that background has given us the ability to know what is missing from a police report, what wasn't done, what the prosecutor, the questions that should have been asked. Like with Natalia, there was probably 3 years of social media that, we painstakingly read every single message. And ultimately what happened was we were able to say, Natalia, this is your age. And this is what happened. And that was later used by the prosecution. And that was later used by the police. And so, in the case that we have been working on for 10 years, ultimately a murder is solved. So for us, it's not just about telling a story. We want to affect change in the same way I believe everyone on this panel wants to, which is why it's a great honor to be with all of you. You all want to affect change, and I think that that's our responsibilities.
On a slightly lighter note, that was fantastic. I'll just be brief. I've never made a documentary before. I've been in front of the camera and behind it and scripted, mainly television. And I fell into making my film because of pandemic boredom. The showbiz was on ice for actors, and because of marijuana. I got high. I was investigating cryptocurrency online because a knucklehead buddy of mine told me I should buy some, but my buddy had given me terrible financial advice in the past. Dave, shout out Dave Miller. Just going to call him out. And so I did some research. I was like, this seems scammy as heck. This is like 2021. I got high. I was like, oh, I should write a book. I don't know how to write a book. I found a journalist. We ended up selling a book project. And then I needed to go out and report on it because everything we'd done previously was via Zoom. It was still the pandemic. And as soon as I emerged into the world, the first thing was South by Southwest in 2022, my hometown of Austin. We were going to give a talk. I figured, turn the cameras on. And the very first interview that I ever recorded is with a guy who's now in prison. His name was Alex McKenzie. He was, thanks. I know, pretty cool, right? Yeah, I ran into him on the floor of the convention center, and I knew who he was, and I went up to him, and I said, hey, I was very nervous. I was mic'd up by the camera guy. I was working with a journalist, but I am not a journalist myself, so I had major imposter syndrome, and I walked up to him, and I was like, hey, I'm Ben. I'm writing a book about crypto. I left out the fraud part. And I was wondering if, we could chat. And he goes, he's such a used car salesman. He's like, yeah, hey, we met in Vegas, right? I'm 46 years old. I have 3 kids. I haven't been in Vegas in over a decade. But my acting training kicked in, and I was like, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, you want to talk to him? So anyway, it started this journey that became, basically working my way up through the crypto hierarchy, such as it was or is, to Sam Bankman-Fried, who I interviewed months before his whole thing went kablooey, traveling to El Salvador, where they were trying to use crypto as real money, supposedly, but there was another story going on there, and then testifying in front of the Senate. So the film became about my journey, but I had to sort of figure out what story I was telling as I was documenting it.
Yeah, and this is a question for everyone, but Julie, I'd like to ask you specifically. When you're working on a case like the Gabby Petito story that has been covered so much in the media, how do you bring a fresh angle to that? How do you uncover things that people might not know about? And I'm sure this is something everybody else can weigh in on, but I'd love to hear from you first.
Yeah, I mean, in this age of the true crime obsession, people are making the same doc about the same subject all the time. So we always come across, why would we want to make another Gabby Petito doc? There's already 3 out there. Why we wanted to do Gabby Petito in this instance is because we were working directly with her family. And we were able to get access to her personal video archive of the trip she took that she lost her life in. So it's that level of access and going right to the core of people's first person experiences is, and to the point of how do you pick a subject or how do you pick a story? It's really the access point. I started doing documentaries, really looking at systemic injustice through a backdoor entrance, whether it's through the opioid epidemic, through a pharmacist, or through Khalif Browder's mother going to Rikers Island every day to visit him, or Trayvon Martin, and the rise from Black Lives Matter, the hashtag Black Lives Matter, to the rise of Trump. So all of those, but working directly every time with the family who experienced this story firsthand. So yes, Gabby Petito has been made a lot of times, and I also don't like the term true crime, and I think it's a pigeonhole because it's salacious. But I do think that we are on a fine line between entertainment and truth, and that's always interesting to have that tension. So yeah, I could go on and on, but that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because this is a genre that involves somebody's worst day in their life or a family's worst day, I think we have an extra responsibility not just to spin a yarn, but to really, when you're making these, ask ourselves, what is the needle I can move? That's the process I go through. What's the needle I can move? What difference can I make? Is there some new aspect to this story that's not known? Obviously, wrongful conviction stories are an obvious why do it. But, for JonBenét Ramsey, I got to know John Ramsey, and I realized that if you ask the average man on the street still today, do you know about the JonBenét Ramsey story? Most people will say, oh, isn't that the story where the parents murdered their child? And it's such an irresponsible, false narrative that inspired me to go, pitch this idea to Netflix and really tell the true story. And the true story, and that's the benefit of sometimes telling these older stories with a 2025 lens, or in that case, 2024 lens. But the true story is the Boulder police were incredibly inept, made a mess of the crime scene, leaked false stories to to press only too willing to run with stories that were uncorroborated, and they painted this very false picture of this family and almost destroyed this family. So for me, that's a good reason to retell the story, even though there have been many JonBenét documentaries before, but most of them leaned into the false narrative, not the actual new narrative. Or the true narrative. Same thing with, I did a show about Bernie Madoff, and the traditional narrative is, gee, what a genius this guy was. How did he pull the wool over the eyes of Wall Street? But a deeper investigation shows that there were a lot of willing participants on Wall Street who got away with murder, in my opinion, who never were held accountable. So that show really, from a 2023 lens, really shined a light on the fact that people blamed the entire financial crisis. Bernie Madoff somehow became, the bad guy for the whole entire financial crisis. But his Ponzi scheme was a well-known fact on Wall Street, and there were a lot of people who benefited from it. So, it's just always looking at a story and how can you move the needle, basically.
Yeah, just to jump off of what Joe was saying, my film is also about financial crime, and one of the things that I kind of really struggled with is how can I visualize financial crime, right? There is no dead body. There aren't the people. There are victims, of course, and so you're able to do interviews with them and get their perspective on it, which really helps, sort of keep the emotional stakes clear. But the way I approached it was through humor. How can I make fun of this? How can I mock it? I think it's very important when you're dealing with what I think is the largest Ponzi scheme in history with cryptocurrency to really puncture the narratives that surround it and expose them for the lies that they are. And you can do that while pontificating, like I am now, or you can do it through humor, and humor is the more effective choice in my experience.
And, for us, it's finding something that was missed. If you know how to look at a police report and you know how to dig into the evidence, the discovery, the paper trail, there's something that was missed. So, like, in terms of doing an old story, we're working on a series about it's called the Texas Slave Ranch, and it was a situation in Hill Country, Texas, where several innocent drifters were picked up, and one, Anthony Bates, the victim, was brutally murdered while they recorded it. And it was a very strange situation where, it was hard to tell, who was at fault and who was doing horrific things to other people to save their own lives. In the course of doing this, and being who we are, taking the time that we do, this is a project we've been working on for, I don't know, probably over 5 years now. We heard one of the, our victims had said that there was 3 people that did this to them. One was a woman, and she was never charged. This happened in the 80s. Police didn't believe a woman was capable of that. But when we talked to the victims, they all said, not only was she capable of it, she was driving it. She shot me. She did this. She did that. We listened to this brutal, horrific recording of a man losing his life. It was very hard. I'm not going to cry. Yes, I do cry about these things. But we heard her on the tape. We heard her egging him on, and it was something that was missed by the police. And she is still alive and can be charged. So that's how you do it differently, right? So
this is kind of a personal question for me, but how does everybody handle these heavy subjects? You go home at the end of the day and you have to make dinner. How does everyone kind of, Joe looks like...
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I learned early in my career to compartmentalize, and it's been very healthy. When we were shooting editing Paradise Lost, rather. So this is 1994. We were still cutting on film, on a Steenbeck. Digital was not quite there yet. And so everything took longer, and there was a particular couple of days where Bruce Sinofsky and I were going through some of the most grisly autopsy photos you could ever imagine. Crime scene video of the bodies being pulled from, naked bodies of 8-year-olds being pulled from a creek. Just trying to determine what little bit of footage we could actually show in the film. And I went home that night, and I walked into my new daughter's, I had a 10-month-old daughter in a crib. I was a new father, and I remember, dropping the arm of the crib and picking up my daughter, trying to have a, fatherly moment, and I kept flashing on the most horrific images you could never want to see. And I really resented Paradise Lost at that point, the project, because I felt like I had stared into the abyss of evil, and it had robbed me of this fatherly, innocent moment. And so I went out and I got myself a little good luck charm, and every now and ever since then, I walk into my house, I throw the coin in a little ashtray, because I smoke weed too.
I knew it, my man.
And that represents for me, like, I'm leaving the work behind. I'm not allowing it to enter into my house. And when I wake up and go, leave the house, I put it in my pocket and I move on. So that was just my way of saying, when I'm home, and I don't want to think about this stuff. I really had to train myself.
I cry about it. Like, I'm okay with that. Like, for me, when I was a prosecutor, there was times that I was told, hey, you lost a case, and I'm crying in my office. I've had bureau chiefs say, that's weak, don't do that. But I'm not going to keep it inside. For me, that's how I keep doing it. Like, if I feel it, I let it out.
It was really important for me to celebrate the team. It wasn't just me who was spending time with these family members and these stories and this lack of kind of focus and media coverage and justice for these shadowed stories. So we had a really amazing cookie place that was near our office. So oftentimes there would be, I'd go and get some cookies for everyone. We had birthday parties. We had a baby shower for an incredible person who helped us get the project started. And so it was important for me that I supported our team, and we had moments to let go and just put the project aside and catch up about our lives. And I think, I'm someone who has lost people, and their cases were not treated with the respect I felt that they should have had. And so it was very personal that I made certain that I could be of service to the families and the stories that we told, that we made certain that people got to see the great loss of who they loved, and that perhaps through this process I was doing a little bit of justice for the people I loved who didn't receive it.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the term or the phrase true crime and kind of the freighted weight that it holds, and maybe like the backlash to true crime where people indicate that you might be harassing victims or families, which no one on this stage does, as we've just heard. Let's talk a little bit about the backlash to true crime and how we avoid falling into those traps.
It's a great question. There's a certain amount of backlash that's going to happen no matter what, because I had a very interesting experience. I won't bore people with the details of how, but somehow I ended up directing Conversations with the Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, for Netflix, a documentary series. Around the same time, I directed a scripted movie with Zac Efron, starring as Ted Bundy, called Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, which is what the judge said to Bundy when he was sentenced. That's why it's got that bizarre title. So around the same time, I covered the same subject in two different mediums, scripted and unscripted. The documentary series went into extreme detail of the crimes and the violence. And when that documentary came out, some critics and some backlash excoriated the series for, giving a serial killer a platform and showing all the violence, and how can you, that's so disrespectful to victims, how can you show the violence? When in fact I had gotten victim approval and there were victims in the show who wanted to talk about it. So that that series was highly criticized for showing violence. Then Extremely Wicked, the whole point of Extremely Wicked is we are seeing the Ted Bundy story through the eyes of his live-in girlfriend, played by Lily Collins, who thought he was a wonderful guy, had no idea he was a serial killer. Even when he was on trial, she still believed in his innocence. He was a wonderful surrogate father to the daughter of this woman, who also believed in him and that he was being wrongfully accused of these horrendous crimes. And the whole film is seen through her perspective, the point of which was to show how serial killers gaslight the people around them. We want to think that serial killers act like serial killers all the time, that they emerge from the shadows dripping with blood, because that gives us this false sense of comfort that somehow we can avoid the fate of being a serial killer. But the reality is, as we know, in this business, the people who do evil in this world are generally the people you least expect and most often trust, like the pedophilic priest or Bernie Madoff or somebody like that. They violate your trust. And that was the whole point of the movie. So there is no violence in the film, to get back to my story. There's no violence in that film at all until the very end, when Lily Collins' character visits Bundy on death row in front of the glass, and he finally admits to her, yes, I did all this. And in this moment of, she emotionally now understands what she intellectually was, pushing back. And there's a brief moment of a montage of all the things in the film that actually now show violence, maybe 45 seconds of violence. And when that film came out, I was excoriated for not showing the violence. How can you show the violence? How can you not show the violence? And the first film was, how can you show the violence? So, some people will never be pleased, but I think there's a certain amount of things you can do to mitigate the backlash. First of all, speak to the victims, make sure they're okay. I recently canceled the project because on the heels of JonBenét Ramsey, we were going to do another famous cold case. I don't want to say who, to respect the family, but the family said, hey, we don't want you to do this. The kids need to move on with their lives. They don't want to be confronted with a Netflix documentary, and so I canceled the project. So victim engagement is very important. Telling the story responsibly is very important. There's certain podcasts that I think have a totally irreverent, disrespectful tone. I mean, this is not just a story. This is somebody's worst moment in their life that you wouldn't wish on anybody. And so we need to be respectful. So those are just some of the things I think about when I choose a story.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
About backlash?
Yeah.
I think anything that becomes popularized will have a lot of backlash. But I do think there's a crassness when dealing with people's, like, to your point, Joe, the worst moments in their life, the worst day in their life. I think that's a handle with care situation. I think as a filmmaker, it's hard for me to even say that I make this work sometimes, because even though I use extreme responsibility, at the end of the day, it has its own life once it's in the public eye. So it's a fine line, and backlash is an interesting topic. Maybe others have something.
I actually want to give a special shout out to Robin Roberts. We all know her from Good Morning America. And when she heard about this project, she said, I want to become involved, not just as an EP, but I want to go and do interviews. And I think that because she is such a trusted face and journalist, to have her participation in our project only elevated the experience for viewers, because they've never seen her in this true crime space. And so, yes, these are stories that had been in the shadow. We had incredible support from the family, from law enforcement. But I think Robin really elevated the storytelling with her presence on screen, and just kind of the warmth and empathy that she naturally has in her inquisitive approach to engaging with people.
For us, we do a lot of shows that aren't, they're not completed cases. They're open investigations, and, some of them you step into and you really don't know what's what or who's who. You don't know who's a victim, You don't know who's an aggressor. There's two different sides of the story. So I think the way we best protect ourselves is sort of what, we all did in our law enforcement backgrounds, or, as a defense attorney, you have to be honest. Like when I meet anyone who's going to do an interview on camera, there's a certain rapport that you develop with them. There's a friendship sometimes, like a kindness. Can I get you something to eat? Would you like this water? What can I do for you? This and that. And I just want to always make sure that's not interpreted that I'm here to tell just their version of the story. Because, and I'm always honest about that. We say, look, we're here to tell the truth. And we had this amazing moment. Ken Maxwell, who's sitting right there, he was interrogating, someone that had committed a lot of crimes and hurt a lot of people, and, who just got more and more aggressive as he started asking him about specific crimes that he allegedly had committed. And this individual got extremely angry and looked right at Ken, and he said, Ken kept saying, I just want to hear the truth. Just tell me the truth. And he said, what is the truth? What does that mean? What do you mean, truth? And Ken just looked him in the eye and he said, what really happened? And that is something I hear in my head all the time. Because I'm like, what am I here to do? I'm here to tell what really happened. And that's what I have to tell every single person that sits down, so they don't misconstrue our relationship or what my job is. And, I think that that's my responsibility,
So we only have a couple minutes left, but I'd love to hear from everybody about what they're working on, just briefly before we say goodbye.
Working on a lot of investigative documentaries for streamers, and it is interesting work. I can't really talk about it, but it's investigative. We're under the radar with a lot of things, but you'll be seeing them soon.
We're working on several awesome projects, also told I couldn't discuss last night. But one thing I can discuss is we're working on a project called The Cuddler. And it was a situation with Georgetown college students that were reporting that a man was getting into bed with them and cuddling. It became this pop culture sensation. They were made fun of. It became, a Halloween costume. And as the story progresses, it becomes more and more serious. And this, almost mythical character we reveal is actually a cybersecurity specialist that was stalking his victims and had government clearance. And he did it for over 10 years. And it kind of, in the end, you learn that there's not just one cuddler. There's another one in California. And the moral of the story is, if a woman or a man says that somebody has hurt them, you need to listen. So...
I'm working on getting my film scene. I was actually somewhat heartened. I was listening to an earlier panel with another esteemed group of filmmakers like R.J. Cutler and folks like that, and they were talking about how difficult it is to get movies out. So if you happen to be a distributor or someone with a pile of money, come see me after the panel.
Working on stuff that I can't talk about.
Fair enough.
I'm under a cone of silence on some things. Very excited to share that a film I'm an EP on called All the Empty Rooms, which is looking at the bedrooms left behind of children who were lost in mass shootings, is going to premiere at TIFF and some other very interesting places. It's an incredible film directed by Josh Steffel. It's looking at Steve Hartman's visiting with these parents, and there's a lot of interesting components for impact and conversation. And so that's coming out very shortly. And then at Cortez Filmworks, we got a lot of good stuff in the pot. We got some gumbo, we got some cornbread, and once again, we're looking at crime. We're looking at big pop nostalgic moments. Oh, and I've directed a music video that will be premiering on YouTube tomorrow. So all this goes to say, for all of us up here, we are working, because not everything comes to fruition. The things we love take years to realize. And as a dear friend of mine said, well, if you want to be in the entertainment business, you need to keep a mix going.
Awesome.
After.
Well, thank you all. Can we have a round of applause for our great panel?
Thank you.
Thank you.